Artificial intelligence presents a fascinating paradox. It promises to simplify our lives by handling complex tasks like analyzing mountains of data, selecting the best healthcare plan, or even doing our taxes. But there's a catch. AI isn't always reliable. Sometimes it fabricates answers, leaving us questioning the very tools meant to make our lives easier. How can we trust AI if we always need a human safety net? In this week's episode, I sit down with Marko, one of the visionary founders of SuperSimple, a groundbreaking company using AI to revolutionize data analysis. Marko offers a compelling solution to this paradox, keeping humans in the loop, not as overseers, but as collaborators who can understand and interpret AI-generated insights.
So there's a lot of layers there, but the simplest thing is you just need to have the AI interact with something that isn't just writing code, because most people won't be able to understand that.
Join us as we explore how this approach might just be the key to unlocking the full potential of AI without sacrificing trust. Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Your engagement is what enables me to continue to create these weekly OpenAI podcasts. We have a number of exciting new episodes coming up on topics such as AI safety and AI agents.
This is the OpenAI Changes Everything podcast with your host, Stephen Walther, where we explore how OpenAI is transforming the future of humanity.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Today we have Marko Klopets, who's joining us from Estonia, right? I think you just said you're in Estonia, which is very exciting. Thank you for joining us today. And let me start by doing a quick intro. Marko is the CEO and co-founder of SuperSimple, a business intelligence platform that helps product and go-to-market teams make better decisions by letting anyone answer complex data questions in minutes. Before SuperSimple, he co-founded a B2B fintech startup and worked in different product and engineering roles, building data and AI applications for the enterprise. Marko, welcome. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Stephen. Great to be here. It's a great day. Yeah, I'm currently in Estonia, and it's crazy warm. We have a heat wave here.
Oh, nice. I was just looking up. I have to be honest with you. I know nothing about Estonia. I just looked up in the Wikipedia before, just to try to get some basic information. It looks like it's over by Sweden, Finland. Is that right? Is it kind of?
Yeah, we're right south of Finland.
Okay. Which seems, I would think, would be cold most of the time, but you're in a heat wave right now?
Indeed. Yeah, our winters are pretty crispy, but the spring is interesting.
Nice. Okay. And what is, for people who know nothing about Estonia, is there great food? What's exciting for Estonia for outsiders? Is it good food? Is there good hiking? Is there what's the big draw for the world for Estonia?
Yeah, I would say food is probably not one of those, but the actual most exciting thing I would say is actually our tech ecosystem.
Oh.
So because Estonia is a relatively new country, from 91 we've been independent, we had to build up the entire country, the entire government from scratch. And that happened to coincide with right when the internet was becoming a thing and we could do a lot of things online. And so we ended up being a pretty early mover in making everything digital. And then in the early 2000s, Skype got started out here, and that became sort of the grandfather for many, many other generations of companies. So like in the Valley, we've got the PayPal Mafia. Here we call ours the Skype Mafia.
Nice. Oh, that's very cool. Well, let's jump into, I know your company, congratulations, by the way, just got $2 million in this initial, round of funding. That's awesome. I'm curious about, what was that experience like, raising the money? Do you feel like there's a lot of I mean, this is kind of a fake question because I know the answer, but a lot of interest in AI right now? Is it easy to raise money? Did you find it more challenging than you thought or easier than you thought? What was your experience like?
Yeah, I think, if you're a good company, then you've always been able to raise money.
Yep.
What's was maybe interesting for us is when we started out, which was about 2.5 years ago. That was about a year before ChatGPT came out, and everybody got super into AI. And so back then, we were framing ourselves very much as an AI company because that then felt a bit of an edgy thing to do. Whereas now, it's literally everyone is pitching themselves as an AI company and trying to get in on the hotness. And so we actually significantly scaled back how much we talk about our AI, even though we've got like incredible state-of-the-art models. We focus on what's the actual problem we're solving, really, what's the space, and there's a lot of exciting stuff there as well. But yeah, definitely, like a lot of AI money is slushing around right now, and everyone's trying to figure out how not to miss the wave. But overall, I would say the fundraising was surprisingly simple.
Great. That's good to hear. Well, so I'm really interested in your background. I know I came across your name originally because you were doing you did a blog entry on stuff you were doing with OpenAI. So obviously you still have some engineering chops and you're still out there doing some engineering stuff. And I noticed from your LinkedIn profile, you started in engineering, you moved over to product for a while, and now you're taking a CEO position. I was curious about that progression, how you went from engineering to product to CEO. Yeah, I was just curious about how did you follow that path, and do you sometimes regret not going back to engineering, or do you still get a chance to do a lot of engineering on the side?
So I got into engineering in the first place just because I thought it would be cool to build stuff. I never thought of this back then as a career move. So I was like 9 years old and I saw some robots at a conference and I was like, great, I want to make one. And so I learned to code. And so that sort of very naturally felt like the very obvious thing to start earning money with when I was in high school. But then a few years down the line, I've been in some great engineering organizations and I've been quite proud of some of the stuff we built. But I started realizing that it doesn't really matter how great your engineering is if the product doesn't really work for the user or if the business doesn't make any sense. And so back then, what felt to me like the dark side was the side of product management. Of course, now as a founder, the dark side is the investor side. But yeah, I jumped over to the product side of things, and I was still in charge of rather technically complex products, dealing with huge amounts of data and trying to use AI to make sense of it for a bunch of enterprise customers. But yeah, the move to product really sort of just came from frustration. As this entire thing has just been about, my entire journey has been about me just trying to build stuff that I thought was cool or somebody needed. Then when I started SuperSimple, it was about just building the thing. It wasn't in any way about the role. I was lucky enough to bring on a co-founder a few months down the line. My CTO, Brit, he actually founded the last startup I used to work at. He founded that, built up the engineering team there, which was really quite fantastic. And then we had the merger and then huge acquisition. But it sort of just felt natural for me to take over anything that isn't engineering and for Brit to handle all of that. Now, obviously, I was very much still involved with coding, especially in the early days. Nowadays, I don't really touch the product code as much, but on the AI side, I'm still quite hands-on, even though we have a couple of great machine learning engineers there as well.
Awesome. So you still get your hands in the code when you have a chance, but
a little bit.
Nice. I'm glad to hear that. Well, so we've been talking a little bit about SuperSimple. Can you provide the audience with what's the elevator pitch for it? What's like the, one paragraph? What is SuperSimple? Why should people care about it? Who's your target audience? What does it do?
Yeah, so SuperSimple is a data analytics platform, essentially, or business intelligence tool, if you're into that kind of term. But essentially, we believe that most of the actual value in companies' data comes from people just getting answers to really quite specific questions. And that's how they eventually, hopefully, uncover some insights. It's not about just tracking your top-level KPIs. And so we let anyone in the team who isn't necessarily an engineer, but could be, answer complex ad hoc questions in a few minutes using either our no-code user interface or by asking questions in natural language, and obviously then using AI.
Awesome.
As for who this is for, most of our customers are really fast-growing SaaS companies. So companies who start to scale past their initial product market fit. As you get past your maybe Series A, Series B, you start running into a bunch more issues trying to understand whether and how you're actually being used, how onboarding is going. You're now going to have a lot more people on the team who need to be aligned as to what you're trying to achieve and what things mean. You generally then set up a data warehouse. And so a lot of problems start accumulating, and that's generally where we step in. And we try to be there both for the very much non-technical people as well as the data teams who are actually meant to, they're tasked with actually empowering everyone else in the team. So on the one hand, we have product teams, we have go-to-market teams, and they have really specific questions. They have their day-to-day tasks. They're trying to run campaigns. They're trying to onboard customers. They're trying to build features. And the status quo is they need to go to the data team every time they have a question. And so what we're trying to get to is helping the data team focus on not that firefighting and all those individual questions, but rather helping them build the foundations, sort of a data model for everyone else, so that they can do their work and focus on what they're actually trying to achieve.
That all makes sense. So I'm a product manager in a modern tech company, trying to be data-driven about all my decisions, but usually all the data is locked up in, I don't know, I've worked at tech companies where they've had all sorts of custom ways of storing their data, where you had to learn custom tools to be able to do analysis. And what you're supplying is a tool so that people who aren't programmers or who don't necessarily want to learn yet another data language, that they have a way to unlock that data to be able to make good decisions for their business and not have to overwhelm a separate data team, which, by the way, almost always takes like a quarter to get any information out of. So not to throw shade on data teams. I know they have a lot of work, but it's challenging when you're trying to make decisions as a product manager and you have that data in front of you and you just don't know what to do with it. SuperSimple can help there because it can help product managers or even potentially like, C-suite members, CEOs, business leaders be able to make the right decisions about their company.
Yeah, exactly. I think the real big evil there isn't actually even the case where it takes you a quarter to get something back, but rather because the friction to asking all of these questions is really high. And, if it takes a quarter, you're obviously not going to do this question asking 5 times a week. That means people just ask way fewer questions, which means that you're naturally just going to learn fewer things about your business.
That makes sense. So it's not iterative. So you can't like probe in or, oh my God, this is weird data. What's going on there? There's no easy way to do that if you have to work with a separate data team to be able to answer all your questions. It makes sense.
Exactly.
So yeah, let's talk a little more about, so I know SuperSimple has you mentioned 2 ways of asking about data. You can use a natural language interface, which I assume is like a chat GPT kind of like conversational interface. And then you also have a no code UI. So why support both? Do you expect people to use both types of interfaces? Why do they both exist? And which one do you expect people to use?
Yeah, so we have customers using, like pretty much every customer uses both.
Okay.
We started from, again, we started this with language models also being quite a bit simpler or less capable. And we first just went out to build a damn good data platform to, just solve the problem as is. And so we took a bunch of those complex concepts that many traditional business intelligence tools that created, and we sort of just intentionally forgot how those work and designed this from first principles around what the user actually tries to achieve. But obviously, we also found natural language to be a great interface for certain questions. So where we sort of see one thing is natural language is fantastic when you're brand new to the product, you get thrown in and you want to go from 0 to something. But what makes our implementation of it a bit non-standard is we don't just, for example, generate something like an SQL query with the language model and then run that in the background. Instead, we've trained an AI to use that same user interface of ours to answer any question you have. And that means a couple of things. First, it shows you its work. So whenever you ask something and you get at least somewhat surprising results, you want to make sure it's exactly correct. So that means you need to understand what were the assumptions the AI made and where did they get this number? What did it mean by activation, for example? And then when you get there, you're going to want to iterate on this oftentimes. As you mentioned, it's this iterative process. You want to explore your data. And sometimes when you're already starting from something, you just put together a chart, a table, whatever it is, you now have something in front of you that you can actually interact with. So if you want to drill down into that one number, you probably want to click onto that one number rather than say like, hey Siri, like drill down into 13 on row D.
Right.
But then because we show you everything the AI did, it's also a really powerful onboarding mechanism. So we did try to keep our interface really, really simple to live up to our name of SuperSimple. But obviously there's some level of learning curve. And so the AI sort of acts like an expert user on your team who shows you, hey, Steven, this is how I would have done it. And then lastly, because the AI doesn't need to do something like generating SQL queries or writing Python code, it actually gets to reason in a slightly higher layer of abstraction. So it needs to think about these semantic steps that our UI supports. And these are actually, they're meant to be way simpler for the human, but that also means they're a lot simpler for the machine to work with. And that just, at the end of the day, means the AI performs better because a lot of that complexity of, for example, how do we join stuff together without creating duplicate rows, or where do we need a common table expression? All of that work is offloaded from the AI to our query engine, which is just a bunch of deterministic code.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think it partially answers my next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. But my next question is like sort of the most brain dead obvious way to go from chat GPT to data would be to have, just have chat GPT generate SQL queries for you. And chat GPT does a pretty good job. I don't know. I just did some light testing of having it come up with different types of complex SQL queries. And it did complex joins and CTEs, and it did some pretty fancy stuff there, and it's able to generate them out. So I guess the question is, and why not just do that? Why not just, go to ChatGPT and say, I need to do a cohort analysis and of every user over 30 on this particular date and have it go crazy and generate the query for you? What's the advantage of like using SuperSimple over just going directly through the chat interface and going directly to SQL?
Yeah, so there isn't really one really short answer, but there's rather there's a multitude of reasons. But one is exactly what I just talked about. So, a major part of that is a lot of our target customers or our users aren't experts at writing SQL. And so they just aren't going to at all know what this thing does. And if the LLM, puts together an SQL query and then generates an explanation for it, there's, the explanation could be correct, but it also very likely isn't exactly correct. And once you get to these more complex questions and your data gets more complex, then it becomes really simple to make really seemingly small mistakes that actually make your entire conclusion incorrect. And so part of how we also solve that is we have our own data modeling layer. So where on our platform, data teams can essentially only surface or cleaned up and somewhat correct data. And the AI then also is able to just directly use that, not go on top of the raw data warehouse or database that you have. But then even if you are technical, I used to be an engineer, I can definitely write SQL, but I would argue it's faster for me, it's easier and more reliable for me to write 10 lines of SQL than to read somebody else's 10 lines and make sure it does exactly the right thing, make sure it handles those nulls exactly how I want it to. There's a lot of complexity there. And then at the end of the day, again, as you get to really complex stuff, the state-of-the-art models just doing SQL, they don't perform all that well. They're impressive, but they're not perfect.
Right. Well, and I guess this gets to, the fundamental tension that I see in a product like yours. So I'm going to digress for a moment. But so I was doing, I had to sign up for a health plan again recently. And so I had like 18 different health plans. I had like a stack of different PDF documents. I had all these different comparisons. I was trying to compare them in all these different dimensions. So I said, hey, I'm just going to load them all up in ChatGPT. I'm going to, create an assistant, load up all the files, have it go through, create a comparison table. And this would be a genius way to simplify everything. And it came out with this really impressive table. It compared the price of different things and it made recommendations and it was beautiful. But then I start spot checking the data and it made up a bunch of it. It was just a bunch of the data in the columns were just made up. And it was like, ChatGPT, thanks for doing this, but I can't, trust what you've created here because it was complex enough because the plans were called something slightly different in the different documents. And so there was a lot of like overhead of doing that. And so I guess the tension that I see here is we want a really easy way to be for a non-technical person, like a product manager, like a non-technical product manager to be able to answer questions. But at the same time, if the person's non-technical enough that they're not able to like analyze, as you said, a SQL query, which, if SQL queries get very complex very quickly. So, then there does seem to have to be a lot of trust at that point, right? In the answer, because we don't really want the user double checking the AI's work. We have to have a certain amount of trust in the AI's work. And so how do you resolve that tension? Because it feels like on the one hand, I don't want to understand what the AI is doing because the whole point is it's probably too complex for me. And I'm just a product manager. I just want answers to my business questions. But on the other hand, I don't completely trust what the AI generates because, it seems to have a tendency to make stuff up when it doesn't know what the right answer is. If I'm making business decisions on that, that's horrible. So how do you like weigh those two things and how do you resolve that?
Yeah, that's classic LLM move is just making up data that fits your narrative better because the underlying reason for that is LLMs sort of don't have a backspace key. You and I, when we're trying to give an overview of something for someone, we can be like, we messed up there. Let's backspace and let's rewrite that. LLMs don't do that, and so they need to sort of make it all look legit. But to your point of you don't want to, or maybe you can't double check work that's really complex. That's why we have the AI interact with those rather high level primitives that we've built into our product. And so all of the underlying complexity for example, understanding or looking at your product's usage retention. This is like a pretty standard question. You can very much do that in SQL. It's a very, very long SQL query to do that properly. And so that's one of those examples where we built tools that work out of the box, where you just, for example, in a B2B setting, you might choose whether you want to look at retention on a per user level or maybe on a company level. And how that is calculated, that's actually fully handled by code that we've written a lot of tests for. And so that's stuff that you can trust because that's our business. But then the AI, which is a bit more creative, its job is actually translating your request from very high abstraction level to slightly lower, to using those available tools to it. And so all of those tools need to be understandable and sort of manageable by those same users that use the AI. But we find that there is a balance that can be hit there. And as I said, the AI doing the work also actually teaches the humans how they could have done that. And so I myself, I'm obviously a power user of our own platform. I probably use our AI every day, but I also just click around every day because sometimes it actually makes a lot more sense for you to have a slightly structured set of options to choose from. For example, you're adding a filter. You can only do that on the columns that you're currently looking at or the properties that a user has. So if you're trying to filter for something that isn't there, that just wouldn't make sense. And it's useful for you as a user to know that this wouldn't really be doable versus the AI could go and, some AIs could just go and hallucinate something. But because we're not just doing something like text generation, we have the AI actually interacting with our platform. It actually has a pretty well-bounded set of what are the things that it can do. So you can't just invent anything. And we've been able to build a compiler internally. There's the thing that essentially translates the AI's output into actual actions in our product. And that compiler can also check a lot of the work that the AI is doing for whether it makes sense. Again, to that point of filtering based on some data that doesn't exist, that's something that we immediately catch, and then we're able to feed back to another AI that fixes those things, or sometimes we can fix those deterministically with code. So there's a lot of layers there, but the simplest thing is you just need to have the AI interact with something that isn't just writing code, because most people won't be able to understand that.
That's very interesting. So you're saying that it's critical that there's an intermediate layer, because that sort of constrains the stupid things the AI might do. And it also, at the end of the day, it does provide an explainability layer so that product managers, at least they don't have to get down to the technical level of SQL, because who wants to parse out a SQL query, especially something written by an AI. But using the no code UI layer, they can look at that, and that's high enough, as a high enough level of abstraction that even a product manager could understand it. But also, you're saying that it's critical that you're also training product managers how to use that UI, no code layer, so they can start to understand how to write those things out themselves. And so it's more like, I guess it's closer to keeping the AI in the loop as a co-pilot, where it's helping humans put together these building blocks that you have with the no code UI layer. And so that you're not entirely trusting the UI, which I feel like is a theme that keeps coming up, I don't know, in this podcast, where people aren't completely trusting the AI things. They want to make sure that humans are in the loop somehow, at least in these early stages of AI, to make sure that's not going off on its own and doing wacky stuff that's going to cause problems for everyone. That's important that we have enough sort of constraints on it so we understand what it's doing. Am I capturing that right?
Yeah, for sure. But I think that sort of human in the loop thing is, back in our context of you ask a data question and you get something back. If you get back something that's at all surprising from a human, so let's say I asked our head of data science and he gives me a report and I'm like, are you sure about this?
100% retention. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to have questions about, like, are you sure? Like, did you consider the fact that we don't yet have this quarter's data for the state of California? Or like, what exactly did you use for the activation metric? And so you want to know exactly, what they did in a lot of cases. You might not care about the implementation details for, did they use pandas in a Jupyter notebook or whether they used SQL, but you want to know sort of what's the business reasoning that they applied. Because that's the stuff that you're thinking of. When you're asking about your user retention, then you care about whether the user is actually retained by whatever definition you're thinking of. And you also, by the way, want to make sure that your definition is the same as your coworker's definition, because otherwise people get really confused. But I think to the point of the slightly more structured user interface alongside the AI, if you consider the use case of image generation, you ask the AI for the picture of a car on a sandy beach and you get it. Now you're like, I'd like to tweak the color of that car. Option A is you tell the AI, hey, like redo it, but now make it green. But I feel like what would be quite natural for me would be to point at the car. That's the thing I want to change. And then I would want a color wheel. I also have a bit of design background, so I'm quite familiar with things like Figma or Photoshop. But you want some type of color picker where you could maybe also just experiment with a couple of different tones. As you slide the slider over, you see all the hues of green, rather than just doing this very strict back and forth between the AI is being asked for something, it gives you back something, and now you try to prompt engineer it into doing the right thing.
So I guess what I'm taking away from that is, you don't believe conversation is the right interface for everything, that there's some things that you can do more efficiently or better if you have a non-conversational UI. And while the conversation UI, as you said, is great for like learning how to use something, it might not be like for an image manipulation tool or for data analysis. You probably need something that's more like tailored to the type of information that you're working with.
Yeah, I think we will have, we'll still have really complex and deep platforms built for specific use cases. And I'm not saying the chat-like interface there is bad at all, but what I am saying is I don't think that alone can really be a great product experience. We've had this massive influx of companies building the new AI CRM or the AI data platform indeed, and they all literally just copy the ChatGPT interface because everyone is super familiar with. It's easy to do. You can get from nothing to a great Twitter demo in minute, or well, in a few days. But I don't think that's very valuable for the user, and I don't think that's very defensible as a business either. And so I do think those same two cases of a data platform or like an image manipulation tool are really good examples of where you do want some kind of other interaction. Or like Uber, take ordering an Uber.
Yeah.
If I want to get to the airport, I could tell that to an AI. That would be fine, sure. But if I'm currently in a new location, this is not my home, I don't have a configured pickup location, I want to see the map where, there's the roads. I try to position myself. My GPS is off by 5 meters, so I'm not exactly sure which side of the road I'm on. I want to drag the pin somewhere. I want to see the price. I want to confirm that. The map interface over there makes a lot more sense than me doing chat only.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Although, if you wanted to start arguing about the car size and have questions about that, or questions about, I could see, it working with Uber, but I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think that there's this picture in people's minds that, okay, we've solved the interface problem. It's all going to be conversational in the future. But I think you're right. I mean, there's lots of places where we'll still need more app appropriate interfaces to make things work.
It could be so that the AI could give you an interface,
right?
In the context of, you say you want to pick up and you want to specify the location. It could be that the AI just sort of uses one of the many tools it has at its disposal to give one to you. But we're definitely, that doesn't exist.
Yep. I did want to go back to, you brought up that, and this was a major problem that I've run into when working as a product manager in the past, is just like different definitions of things causing all sorts of problems. Like, what a customer is, which you would think would be simple, but quickly these things become very, very complicated in companies where you have dozens of teams, if not hundreds of teams, all working with slightly different definitions of these things. And then you're comparing data and you're trying to make decisions. You're trying to, correlate all this data together. And I know you've talked some about creating something called a semantic layer. And I was curious, I know you had a blog entry on that. I was wondering if you could explain what that is and how does that relate to SuperSimple, and does that solve the problem that I'm worried about like definitions?
Yeah, so what most companies will have is some sort of database, some sort of data warehouse where there's a lot of things that make sense to engineers, but that's not necessarily the same terminology, the same sort of concepts that everyone else in the company thinks in terms of. And so our data modeling layer, or the semantic layer, is where you create the concepts about, what are the business terms that people think in terms of, where does the data come from for each of those, how do we clean that up, how do we join that together with every other bit of data. And so, for example, for Uber, they might have the concept of a passenger, of a driver, of a ride, of a cancellation request. And all of these things need to be a bit standardized for people to be able to actually use them. If you just have everything in, here's a million different blobs of JSON, that's not very manageable or usable by anyone. So the data modeling there is where data teams can centrally create these sorts of slightly more on Rails experiences for everyone else, so that they don't run into a lot of issues down the line. That's where, for example, you define also the relationships between different data models. So effectively abstracting away all of the database joins and everything like that needs to happen. And if you have test customers in your production system, you might filter them out. If you have certain things like, hey, this is how we consider somebody to be onboarded, you would want to define that once centrally, and our data modeling layer lets data teams do that in a source-controlled way.
Got it. And is this something that your data team will be setting up? Is that the idea that they would set up this sort of data modeling layer, the semantic layer, and then that would provide common definitions across like product managers and GTM people, and all of those could be able to work against that, or are product managers also sort of involved in creating that semantic layer?
So as you go to slightly bigger companies and as you get a data team in place, then it generally is the data team that manages this. The reason is, there's a lot of really technical stuff that's happening in databases, and there's a lot of context about that the engineering team has, but nobody else has or should have really. And the data team also acts as the central hub between, for example, the product teams, the marketing teams, and so they can look at it slightly broader and make sure that, for example, that same customer entity or the customer model works for both and can be tied together with both the CRM data from HubSpot as well as our own in-database stuff, as well as maybe those events we send out to Intercom or whatnot. It's also, it is somewhat technical in its implementation, because you might need to do things like deduplicate some rows depending on where your data comes from. A lot of things like BigQueries might have slightly annoying data in them. And again, whether and how these need to be deduplicated, like that's the type of thing that a data team would know or an engineer would know, but nobody else can really know. And so we think the role of a data team should essentially be two things. One, they should be empowering everyone else to work with data, not doing the work for everyone else. That's a bit of the teach a man to fish type of thing. And then the other thing is, there will always be something like the last 10% of questions that are really complex. You will need a data team. You will need somebody to maybe even train a custom model to predict some behavior or whatever it is. We're not going to get rid of data teams, but we actually want them to be able to focus on these two things, because right now these teams get massively bogged down with, hey, the CFO needs this. Hey, the marketing team needs this.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is going to sound bad, but my experience with data teams a lot of the time is I always think of them like medieval monks who know like obscure passages and like, these documents that explain why we use this particular like time range in figuring out like, I don't know, a retention or whatever that they have, that there's a lot of, it's not so much even like technical knowledge, that oftentimes the data team has so much sort of institutional knowledge that they have these, and they're sort of the keepers of that information. And that's hard to, again, if you have lots of different teams in a company trying to make these decisions, then some of these decisions are arbitrary, and there might be an obscure reason for why something was done in the past. So I could see the necessity of empowering the data team to be the team that's responsible for coming up with the standards for, the definitions of things and to create a common layer. And I understand why that might be very technical, and it's probably outside of what a normal product manager wants to do. So let me shift gears a little bit. So I noticed on looked up your LinkedIn profile, and you have the big banner text across the top, lose the static dashboards. Sounds like a motto or a call to war or something that you have going on there. And I was curious about, like how you think about SuperSimple in relationship to, other products. Like there's Tableau out there, there's Microsoft Power BI. There's a lot of these products out here that promise in one way or another to help you tame your data. How does SuperSimple like relate to some of these other products?
Yeah, so let's say we're very much around the same category. Now, the main insight that I founded this entire company for and dedicated my next, hopefully, couple of decades of my life for is, I'd used a bunch of those tools, and they're really good for the case where you want to precisely design a dashboard for future reuse. That's something that you need to send to your investors once a quarter. You'll get to make it pixel perfect. But that's not where the real actual value comes from. The real value always comes from you being able to just answer something that you don't necessarily have the exact dashboard for. I think the reason, or at least one of the reasons, this wasn't really solved in the past was, both of those names that you mentioned and a bunch more, they were founded, Tableau was founded more than 20 years ago, I think. Power BI isn't super new either. Databases were actually really different like a decade ago.
Yeah.
We didn't really have these cloud data warehouses be this ubiquitous. We've had this trend of the modern data stack, which is a bit of a silly term, but it means that pretty much every company now actually does have a great database with all the data together, but you don't necessarily have the database structured for every question that your team is going to answer. Beforehand, if you were running stuff off of, let's say, your MySQL or maybe SQL Server, then you would need to quite tightly design the database for exactly those queries you were going to run, because otherwise it just would not compute really. The query would take days, or just wouldn't work. But now we have really powerful cloud data warehouses who disconnected the storage of data with the computation on top of it. And that means that you can fire off a really complex query and get results back in still seconds. It's pretty much constant time. And what that means is you can now take a lot of those questions that you didn't design the database for, and the database will still figure it out. And so we're able to really utilize some of those trends to move a lot of the more complex work out from something like offline notebooks in Python land into where the business users actually need that data. And obviously, another one of those big unlocks for us has been AI, not just for the natural language querying, but also things like in the background analyzing your data for new trends or anomalies, or trying to surface things that you should be looking at. But at a high level, the main difference between us and any of the more legacy tools you will see is we're great at answering questions that you're going to have now and you want to get an answer in a few minutes. Some of those other tools are great for perfectly customizing something that you want to preserve for future generations.
Got it. Well, so what's next for SuperSimple? What are you focused on right now? Do you feel confident that you have product market fit? Are you going after what's kind of the next stage in evolution of SuperSimple?
Yeah, so we came out of stealth about a month and a half ago, and we're now really starting to more rapidly scale up our customer growth. So we've already have a bunch of great logos, and we have a bunch of really great product retention stats.
Nice.
But really, it is about building up the go-to-market machine for us internally now, and making sure that we get this to everyone else out there. I think slightly longer term, what we're looking at is somewhat related to that ChatGPT use case you brought up, where a lot of the questions that you have about your own sort of life or sort of data, if you will, those reports or those PDFs from the different providers are also there's some information that's available to you. And the job that we're trying to do isn't really database querying. It's the problem space is about making sure every person in every company has access to the right information they need to do their jobs. And so we're trying to also pull in a lot more unstructured data and combining that with the structured facts in your database. So in your database, you have stuff like how your customers are actually behaving, how big some deals are. But then you have a lot of organizational knowledge that sits in maybe a knowledge base, in your calendars, in your emails, and bringing that all together to just make sure that without even necessarily having to go ask, knowledge workers will have the right context in the right workflow. I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff that we're eager to show soon.
Oh, that's very cool. Well, so how do people learn more about SuperSimple? What do you recommend?
So our website is by far the best way. So supersimple.io. We also have a blog. I just put out the blog post today about my journey from being an engineer who used a bunch of data to then going to a product manager who never used data and felt super guilty about it. And yeah, just check us out over there.
Any thoughts while wrapping up? Any closing thoughts you want to share with people?
I love when people in and around AI focus on just solving real problems that they've seen somewhere. And there's a lot of great companies to be built around that, with or without AI. I would really, really like the trend of people just doing AI because it's hot to stop. Because it's just it just wastes people's time. The people who are building this, it wastes their time, and it's also gonna just confuse customers, and it's gonna having 1,000 new companies every week that are just going to die out because somebody just wanted to put AI founder on the resume isn't maybe the most productive thing that the world could be doing. But those same people can definitely do really cool stuff if they focus on, actual problems they're seeing in their lives.
So focus on problems, not on AI, even though it's very bright and shiny right now.
Exactly. AI is an enabling technology. It's an incredible one, but it's, I sometimes use the analogy of Ajax from 20 years ago. Yeah. Ajax was super hot. It enabled things like Google Maps, but you're not going to build an Ajax company. Now everyone has Ajax. Everyone is going to have AI. So figure out how your company is going to be sort of meaningful in the world when everyone else is also an AI company.
Very cool. Well, hey, super big thank you for your time today. I appreciate it, especially, calling in from Estonia. It's been great having you as a guest today. And thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the OpenAI Changes Everything podcast, where we explore how OpenAI is transforming the future of humanity. Please remember to subscribe to ensure that you receive future episodes.